Now we'll officially restart after the meeting recording announcement. So welcome to this potentially last meeting of the Commercial Corridor Task Force. Could you call the roll, Lynette, such as we need to do it?
Yes, thank you. I'll start with our SACOG board members. Chair Sander.
Here.
Vice Chair Saragosa.
Here.
Director Jankovich absent. Director Allard.
Here.
Director Gallardo absent. Director Harris absent. Director Kozlowski.
Present.
Director Samayoa absent. Director Chenier.
Here.
Director Slowey absent, and Transit Representative Mike Dewar.
Here.
Thank you. Dina Ellis absent. Michael Stretch absent. Stefan Dawes absent. Julie Young.
Here.
Sandra Drown.
Present.
Thank you. Jose Bodipo Mimba.
Here.
Isabel Domeyko.
Present.
Amy Lappin.
Here.
Louise Bedsworth. Absent. Chet Hewitt. Absent. And Jen Matulich. Absent. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Lynette. Well, it is hard to believe that almost a year has passed. I guess 10 months have passed since we started this off. And certainly none of us probably expected to have a year like the year we've had. As a matter of fact, in January, we had this novel concept that when we had a meeting, we would all be together in one room, looking at each other, talking to each other, getting all those emotional nonverbal cues from each other. And now it's been replaced with comfort of our own home and interesting backdrops. But I think during this time, we have still made progress. And for that, I want to issue some thank yous. Certainly, thank yous first go to the volunteer members of this task force. You have come from the private sector, from the nonprofit sector. You've brought your experiences with you. Your contributions have been really valuable, perhaps even you might say invaluable. And to my SACOG colleagues, thank you for your work, adding one more meeting to your schedule. I know all of you are here by choice and you understand the importance of this work and future work in this space, but I just want to thank you for that commitment and for that acknowledgement. And you know, on a personal level, you all stepped up again to serve your community, and that's something we should all be proud of. And then, of course, we owe a big thank you to our SACOG staff. I think first there, we've got to recognize Jennifer Hargrove, Dov Caden, Rosie Ramos. I think those are our primary authors of the toolkit we've got in front of us today. And they also served as leads in coordinating the materials and the speakers and the things that we've done in our meetings. So special thanks to Dov, Jennifer, and Rosie for their hard work on this. So let's talk a little bit about where we started. You know, that first meeting way back in January when we actually met with each other, we talked about barriers to infill and what it would take for revitalization in these commercial corridors that literally are in every jurisdiction in our region. Then we had staff take us through an exercise to figure out how could we identify solutions and understand our role as cities or policymakers or private sector partners, how we could play in knocking down those barriers. And that's really the core of our work as a task force. We heard about projected demand in our region for small lot and attached housing. We heard about demand for constructing 11,000 units annually, which is a pretty remarkable number. It's about double what we regionally build, annually build, and about 7,000 of those should be, according to our SACOG plan, in infill areas, which make our work all that more valuable. So I'm eager to spend some more time looking at this toolkit, talking to my elected colleagues and our private sector partners about what it's actually going to take to get this to work. I think we're going to have a presentation to my Rancho Cordova City Council and figure out in detail how it's going to work for us. And I want to encourage other cities in the region to do the same. We can talk about that and what that might look like a little later. I think this need is probably ironically amplified by the pandemic. because the way in which we plan, the way in which we do things has been altered, and we don't fully know yet how. I think in detail all those things will play out. For example, this medium that we're using right here, 3 years from now, are we going to have a large number of these Zoom meetings instead of using our roads and our streets and our corridors to get to a common location and meet each other? We don't know. We'll just have to see how our society is impacted. But this work on commercial corridors has to be influenced by that. It will be because of the market. And we have to be respectful of that changing situation in how we view the future of these commercial corridors. So as I look to the future of my community and the future of the region, we have lots of opportunities if we can think real hard about our investments, our growth patterns, our regulations, our fees, and how we can adapt all of those to make really vibrant and resilient communities. It's going to be really hard work, but I think what we're doing here is foundational to a change in how we view those corridors and how we're actually able to implement them in the private sector marketplace in the region. So with that, I think we need to keep our eyes open about all the issues we've heard about in this particular task force work. And today, I'm hoping we can have our last, as this group, in-depth discussion about what that may look like. So before we dive into the agenda, specifically, I'd like to open it up for anything another task force member would like to say about an update in your community, something relevant to the commercial corridor work, something you think that would inform us before we get into the regular work of the day. So are there any task force member updates? Not seeing anyone jump to that prompt. Jay, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to offer a little bit. We took a significant amount of our CARES dollars and invested them in the small business, primarily in our corridors, mostly in at-risk neighborhoods. So that, I think, is or was a good starting point for us. We're also looking at how we continue those investments, depending on what our budget looks like, obviously, for next year. But that's a priority. So we have been investing in those areas.
All right. Any other reports?
Hey, David, this is Michael.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, so I think, one of the things we brought up when we first started this way back in January was the inability or at least for us, the lack of tools for property owners that essentially are using old strip malls as a tax write-off. We have a couple of these in town where, we've just had a very difficult time to get any new development there because the owner just doesn't want to do anything, and it's become blighted. And it's still a great challenge for us as we move forward here. I mean, we have some sort of what I would call nuclear options, but it's something that I don't think anyone's had the appetite to go down. So it's still a struggle for us here in that case, but because we do have some great locations that would dramatically transform a couple of our corridors, but a challenge with owners that don't want to do anything.
All right. Anybody else have an update for the good of the order right now?
It's Sandy Dren with Yuba City Downtown
Yes.
Business Association. So I was just going to share, we just had a new bridge that was implemented, and I think we're in the third phase of the money being spent. And I think a lot of that was, we've got a hotel coming in, rezoning the downtown to incorporate, stretch our map. And I think a lot of the ideas that you guys have been sharing has kind of helped when I've sat in a couple of those meetings and they've asked, community feedback. So I appreciate all you guys are doing. And this has really been helping when I sit in those meetings, because I think we've got 3 more grants that get tied into that bridge. And then it is what it is. So it's been kind of nice because we've got some growth opportunity for our downtown.
Good. All right. Well, with Michael's comment in particular, it sounds like we're bleeding into our policymakers toolkit feedback and priorities, which is agenda item number 2 on our agenda. And I think, Jennifer, you've got a little presentation for us on this, I think.
Yep.
All right. I'm going to give you control and let you take us into that agenda item.
Thank you. Get my screen share
And
going.
colleagues, get ready to be polled.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. I'll give you a warning on that too. Nobody likes pop quizzes. Good morning. When we met a couple of months ago, we had all of the toolkit strategy components ready, but it wasn't yet into this complete and cohesive document that you have now. So all the strategies that we discussed last time are now fleshed out with more information and laid out, hopefully in what you find is an organized and well-designed document that you were emailed in advance of today. Also, since your last meeting, SACOG has just finished a process for establishing green zones or we're midway through the process for establishing green zones to support our Green Means Go strategy. You'll recall hearing a bit about this at our last meeting as well. Green Means Go is our place-based investment strategy really aimed at accelerating infill development and supporting transportation options. And the places that we're targeting with that place-based investment strategy are infill areas throughout the region that we're calling green zones. So for the last couple of months, we've held a green zone nomination process where we asked the cities and counties in our region to identify their priority infill areas so that we can have a regional set of green zones. And in this process, we had amazing participation. 23 of our 28 member agencies nominated green zones. Our team here is reviewing all of that information and following up with local staff as needed so that we get those green zones ready for our December SACOG board meeting, where we will be asking the SACOG board to adopt these regional green zones. This is exciting for us for many reasons, but one directly tied to this committee and this toolkit. The green zones are infill areas, many of which are commercial corridors. Many, if not all, face the same challenges to increasing infill development that this group has been discussing for the last year. So this toolkit really does have the potential to not just sit on a shelf, but be useful to the region and provide tools and strategies for these green zones to consider as we move forward with Green Means Go. As I mentioned at our last meeting, we did talk a lot about the toolkit already. Dav and myself gave a comprehensive presentation on the strategies in the toolkit, so I'm not going to repeat that fully today, but I am going to go through a quick overview just to refresh this for all of us, because we do hope to get one last point of input from you all today and hope to continue the discussion on the toolkit. You'll recall that our first meeting together, we had this list of barriers or challenges to infill development and commercial corridor revitalization. This list and the challenges that really rose to the top in that first discussion really became our guidepost for the discussions with this committee over the last year. And from those discussions and building off some of our other work, such as the housing policy toolkit and our Green Means Go strategy that I just mentioned, we have the toolkit that you have before you today, Policymakers Toolkit for Commercial Corridors. For this toolkit, we purposely tried to make the table of contents something that you could skim and get a high level understanding of the strategies. So this is a screenshot of the table of contents, and you can see we have the topic area such as infrastructure, but also right there in the table contents have listed the actual strategies. So to keep this something you could scan quickly, we've shortened the strategy descriptions here to be as succinct as possible, but still hopefully be understandable so that maybe this table of contents can become a very quick, scannable, almost a quick reference guide for you if folks don't have the time or the need to read through the whole document, or this can just point you to the strategies that jump out to you in the toolkit. I'm not going to touch on each of the toolkit sections. I'm not going to go through all the strategies, but I am going to touch on each of the sections in the toolkit. And before I start, just to echo what Chair Sanders said, we are going to run a real-time Zoom poll after my presentation. So The question we're going to be asking you is sort of within each of these topic areas, which strategies would be your near-term priorities. So please just keep that in mind as I run through the topics here and as you skim the toolkit, and we'll launch that poll at the end. So first up in our toolkit are infrastructure strategies and tools. These are strategies about understanding the infrastructure needs on the corridor from the user perspective. How easily can I get there? How do I travel around once I am there? But also offers strategies for supporting development, including the need to have a very clear understanding of what improvements are needed above ground as well as below ground to really support and facilitate an increase in development. Also, in the spirit of facilitating development, the toolkit includes a section on development review process streamlining. The tools in this section are aimed at providing a transparent and predictable process that can help reduce time and cost for development. And then reducing cost and fees for development is also its own category in the toolkit. These strategies includes things like reducing fees for projects on the corridor, or changing from assessing your residential fees on a per unit basis to doing so on a per square footage basis. At the second task force meeting we had, it really hit right around the statewide stay-at-home order because of COVID. It was in March or April, and you all had a really great discussion at that meeting about the ecosystem of a corridor, how that corridor and the surrounding community really rely on each other. The community relying on the businesses on the corridor for their daily needs, those businesses also then relying very much on the neighboring community for their businesses to survive. It was just a really great discussion, and out of it we have an entire section on strategies for supporting more housing in and around the corridor to really build out that ecosystem that benefits everyone. This includes things like removing lot coverage requirements or setback or parking requirements. It also includes strategies for changing zoning codes to allow for higher densities, including missing middle products like fourplexes and ADUs in the single family neighborhoods that are adjacent to so many of our commercial corridors. Throughout the toolkit, you'll see a number of strategies that can help support more housing and more housing types that are traditionally more affordable or attainable to many middle and lower income households. But we also included a section of the toolkit specifically with strategies for supporting affordable housing because subsidized affordable housing is still very critical to providing housing for some of our most vulnerable populations. And at our last meeting together, the committee discussed gentrification and displacement as we work towards revitalizing these areas and increasing development in and around these corridors. We also have to recognize that our work to improve the area can contribute to the displacement of some residents or businesses in the community. The toolkit offers a menu of strategies aimed at reducing displacement, much of which start with the community engagement, building a baseline understanding of who's living in the community and who's operating and doing business there today. Finally, the toolkit has two really unique sections that are not strategies, but are complementary to the strategies. First, the toolkit has 3 case studies of different types of development projects that can be models or templates for commercial corridor development. We're fortunate that Julie is on this task force and was willing to provide some of these real world examples from her work and allow us to use them to really highlight how some of the toolkit strategies can make a difference for development projects. And the second component that's not a strategy, but in the toolkit is the history of zoning. This is something that Dov wrote a while back for our housing policy toolkit that we felt was important to bring into this toolkit to provide that important understanding of how zoning has historically been used, or at least single family zoning has historically been used to segregate communities by race or by income, and then the effect that that's had on shaping our communities today. Since the toolkit has entire section on zoning changes to support more housing. We felt like this history was important to bring into the toolkit as well. So this is the high-level toolkit in a nutshell. Obviously, it does not include or address all of the challenges facing commercial corridor revitalization. It's targeted at those challenges that have risen to the top in the discussions of this task force and those that really local agencies have some influence over. So as mentioned, like early on, you're not going to find strategies in here about how to deal with property owners or unwilling property owners or fragmented parcels on the corridor. I think that just shows, we have more work to do. We do have a lot of tools available in this toolkit already, but it's certainly, there's a lot of multifaceted, many challenges facing corridor revitalization. So as I warned earlier, we're going to launch into a short poll. It's just 6 questions. We want to get your reaction to these strategies and hopefully seed your discussion on the toolkit today. So I'm going to ask Katie to please launch and facilitate that poll for us. If you're an attendee or a SACOG staff and you're not one of our task force members, please don't take the poll. We really just want our task force members to be the ones taking this poll. After Katie launches it, Chair Sander will turn it back to you to start the discussion off today. Katie,
Okay.
if you're ready.
Yep. I'm going to launch the poll right now. Everyone we'll do 20 seconds per question, and I'll give you like a 5-second warning. So here is the first question. Are you guys seeing it?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, about 5 seconds left. Okay, we're gonna end this one. Has everyone gotten their vote in? Okay, and then I'll share the results so that everyone can see. And then it will go to the next question. About 5 seconds left. Okay. So here are the results of that one. Then third question coming in right now. About 5 seconds left.
Too much pressure.
All right. Here are the results of that question. And now we'll go to the fourth question. You're halfway done. About 5 seconds.
This is like college, right? The professor that schedules the Monday morning exam.
Okay. Here are the results. Here's question number 5. I'll give you a little more time. There's a lot of answers in this one. Give you about 5 more seconds. All right. Here are the results of question 5. Just one more after this one. And then here is the last question. Five seconds. All right, and here's the results of the last one. And Jen or Chair Sander, I'll turn it back over to you guys.
Yeah, Chair Sander, please, for you guys
All right.
to have a discussion.
Very good. So we did the polls, and you've had to pick some of your priority areas within the toolkit as part of the poll. So I just would like to hear some reflection on that, and if there are any of those in particular that you would like to champion or you think we should work more on going forward.
David, this is Julie.
Yes.
I had a really great opportunity 2-3 weeks ago to go up to Yuba City and meet with the mayor up there. And he had been interested in some of our projects relative to revitalizing, adaptive reuse and some of the housing strategies that we're working on. And the one thing I think that became really apparent in the way we review this kind of information we look at is there's the actual quantifying information and infrastructure and the engineering of what it is we do. But you can build a super efficient street that takes you to a bridge. And if it hasn't been programmed from the perspective of what is the story of our community, are there trees going down the median of this really fast street, or is this, don't you dare try to cross it on foot because, you're going to get creamed by a car going 60 miles an hour. I'm just getting from Yuba City to Marysville. And if you're ever going to hit that left blinker to turn into downtown or that right blinker to turn into downtown, there needs to be something compelling to do so. And I think sometimes we forget that we are our own audience. Like when I ask people, what does it take to get you out of your home on a Thursday night to go downtown? What does it take for you to hit the blinker on your car to head in and decide to pick something up for your work team from the bakery? I think all of those moments are kind of the story of our community where we slow down a little bit and look at not just what we're delivering from a quantity perspective, but what we're delivering experientially. And I think both of those conversations are critically important as we're trying to do like task force planning. I think when you're trying to get people's attention and specifically to build consensus, it's really, do we share a common story? And what does our town represent? And what does it take to get us out of our home? What does it take to get us to participate in our community? Because just simply providing infrastructure, or even if we're able to solve all housing insecurity and put everybody in a home, if one thing we've learned from COVID, it's how do we connect and how do we stay connected? And that's critical to our mental health and everything that really makes community beautiful. So I think that it's just, as we're looking at these things, like, you know, maybe the infrastructure knowledge is critical. And I've even said so in prior meetings, like what's underground, what's above ground, what's the plan here? But if you don't feel like you want to jump on your bike or go for a walk, it might be a moot point. So that's it. I just want to remember that the storytelling that we do about our communities is as impactful as the infrastructure and the engineering and the quantity takeoff. And I will have more comments relative to housing later, but I just think that's an important point not to miss.
Very good point. Anybody else?
Hi, this is Isabel. I have some feedback on the document, some of the strategies that were brought up. One of the strategies was about converting fees from a per unit to a per square foot basis. This is something that I've tried in the past and something that has been tried in Sacramento. There was an effort to convert multiple fees from a per unit to a per square foot basis, and only one at the end of the day was able to be successfully converted. And the reason for that is that state law requires fees to be based on usage. So whether your unit is 500 square feet or 1,500 square feet, you're gonna have a certain impact because of the people living there, and you're going to have a certain impact on the sewer system. You're going to have a certain impact on the water system. So I don't really agree with that approach because it would require changing state law to, in a significant way. So some alternative suggestions would be to take facilities out of the fee program and reduce the fees for everyone to a lower base, and then instead looking for other ways to fund your the other fees or the other facilities. So for example, you could go out and get philanthropy dollars to go fund a community center or something else, or you could leave it all in the fee program, but you could find some additional dollars and you could use those dollars to offset the portion of the burden on your infill areas. But just from a legal standpoint, some of those suggestions I personally think are infeasible. That's it, thanks.
Isabel, I have to speak to that, not to challenge your experience, but simply to say, I think I've let the group know, for example, our West Sacramento project, where we have 148 studio units, the delta between the occupants in 25 single family homes versus 148 studio units, housing was $1.5 million. The studio units are $5.3 million. That's a $3.8 million penalty based on per unit that a high density project gets hit with. And when you're talking about the same number of occupants and you're talking about how desperately housing is needed, I do think we have to look at the per unit cost I agree with you that use, just like your photocopier, you know, if you use it 10,000 times, it's not the same as you've used it 1,000 times. But to have a $3.8 million penalty to deliver density in a market rate condition, and the thought that we just go find money, well, if I go find money and somebody contributes that money to my project, I'm delivering units at a market rate level at about $170,000 a unit. A typical affordable project is about $550 to $1 million a unit. So I can put 3 times the units on the ground in a market rate scenario than an affordable housing developer can do. So to find money triggers all of the expenses that we're trying to avoid in our beta test that we're doing in West Sac. And it's why we put it in as one of the case studies. I agree with the logic that there is a use factor, but I'm also saying there is a real hurdle to doing the very development that we want to do to help solve the housing insecurity.
Yeah, I mean, I understand. I think that's an equity argument, and I think that's a good equity argument. And there's a strong case to be made for that. I just think that legally there are some significant challenges that would need to be overcome. And I was trying to provide some alternative suggestions on how it could be done without having to go back to the legislature.
Isabel, is that a Prop 218 problem?
I don't think so. I don't know. Amy, I know you're on this call. I think it's the next, whichever ordinance is the nexus study law for development impact fees. I don't think that's Prop 218. I think Prop 218 is about special taxes.
Yeah, I think 218 may have specified that a district could not have a favorable area, you know, another, like you can't use regular ratepayers to subsidize development elsewhere. Something like that.
Yeah, and just to chime in, I'm not sure exactly which one.
Other comments?
I've got one more, of course I do, David.
Sure, go ahead, Julie.
That is, I think if it's a state issue, we do have to take it on. You know, I think, you know, from my perspective, the way we've been working on this is to create a development agreement with the city so that we craft a hybrid to create something a little more innovative than typical, you know, suburban housing development versus affordable units. I think we've got to explore new types of product, and that's why we put so much energy into doing this and the development agreement that we've achieved. And I'm very hopeful that when we have this project, we've introduced the case study, but when we have it completed, I'd love to be able to share it in more detail because I do think it bears replicating. So I do think that if we need to take things to the state level, that we've got to do it. I think just simply to say we don't understand why it's happening or we don't know where it is that this, you know, law impacts us detrimentally, that's the very crux of the problem we need to solve.
Other comments?
Chair Sander, if I
Go ahead,
I
Jim.
might, just for a second, I appreciate the conversation a lot, right? And absolutely have appreciated this, the nature of this task force in terms of getting some of our elected officials on here with all of you as the experts. I do think, you know, Chair Sanders set this up as this is sort of the conclusion of the task force for now in this incarnation. There's a lot of work still to do. And you heard Jennifer Hargrove and Chair Sanders talk about these green zones. And the great news is we have 20 plus jurisdictions now, some of which are represented by the electeds on this meeting, who have sort of put their hands up and said, we need, we're going to focus our efforts here for these infill areas, and we need help. And so I would say if there are things we need to change at the state level, I'm not going to suppose that's going to be easy, right? But I don't, I don't think we want us to limit ourselves by what's possible changing at the state level. Just the same, which in terms of the follow-up to this effort, perhaps going forward, when we've got Smud here and Jose on the line, we have a lot of regional agency partners who we would like to actually convene, and we've been talking to already about how do we get some of our regional agency partners to actually align around these green zones. How can we all stand on the same side of this and say, we're going to make this easier for you to do the right thing rather than harder or more expensive. And that's very simplistic. And I'm not saying SMUD is making it harder, but I do think there's an alignment here just, regionally that, and Chair Sandra, you've pointed this out many times, right? In terms of, if we just sort of all get on the same page and try to get in lockstep as the public agencies, as the government side, as the fee setters, to make this kind of development easier, we think there's a huge opportunity there. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, it's just a couple of pages actually in the toolkit, that discussion. But politically, I think many of us have observed this for a long period of time, that when those of us who have appointments to other agencies as elected officials, not our own, serve over there in that other capacity, we don't necessarily engage as much. And that work ends up being less helpful to the region, I should say, than it probably should be, just because we're detached from it. We've got our main assignment, we've got this other assignment, and what happens over there tends to be more staff driven than what happens right in front of us. And that's something as elected officials we can all endeavor to change and try to alter to the greatest effect for these common goals like commercial corridors. So yeah, I think there's a lot of work still to be done there. And surprisingly, in this process this past year, James, we've seen a lot of those agencies actually come to us and say, hey, we're curious about what you're talking about here, and willing to work with us. So yeah, there's definitely ground that could be plowed there, and good things that could come from it. All right, any other comments on the toolkit? Those are all very good so far. So my elected official colleagues or our development partners, what do you think you need to push this forward? What's the next step? Do you need, as I mentioned in my comments earlier, presentation from SACOG staff on this toolkit? You want public discussion of it. What steps do you think would be necessary to help you move the ball forward on your commercial corridors in your area of interest?
This is Michael, David.
Yep, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, so I think, SACOG staff's been great already. We have one of the applications in for Broadway in Placerville, which is one of our 3 corridors in the city. And whether it's I think one thing would be good for the rest of the city council, maybe would be a presentation from SACOG staff a little bit more to get everybody else a little bit more bought in. I think there's a lot of there's some public what's the right word, public that doesn't believe in anything that the SACOG does in our area. So we have to kind of overcome some of that, I think, local trepidation from folks on these regional planning agencies. But that would be helpful, I think, from my end. There's a lot of goodwill and business owners that want to see change along Broadway in Placerville. And then, like I said, we have one that that doesn't care. But I think there's plenty to do along the corridor, even outside of that particular strip mall, that we can do in the area and really enhance a large part of our city. So it's an exciting endeavor for us. To look at mixed housing or mixed units in that area, where and just for some context, we have about 150 affordable housing units that are coming into, we're going through the process right now outside of our corridors, which are great. We'll hit our arena numbers and we're looking good, but certainly want to add more infill into our two main corridors along Broadway and Placerville Drive. And I think this has an opportunity to really jumpstart that process, even like as I said, outside of the problem that we have with one recalcitrant business owner. So a presentation would be great, and I know SACOG staff's already working closely with our staff, but I think from that public perspective, as well as for the rest of my council colleagues, I think that would be great as well.
Okay, good. John? Oh, you're muted, John. There you go.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
I want to thank you for your effort in putting this task force together and you know, driving the ball forward. It's been extremely valuable. You know, Roseville is like other communities in the Sacramento region. We struggle to rebuild the older part of our communities, especially with the disappearance of redevelopment, which I still think was a crime. But and I think most of you would agree with me on that. I think I'm going off council, and this is this SACOG meeting. This month will be my last SACOG meeting. I don't know who will be stepping in behind me because it's up to the mayor to kind of coordinate the appointments, but I'm pleased that Mike Dewar from our staff has been involved in this. Mike has been a tremendous driver in our community for these kinds of things over however many years Mike has been there, longer than I have. What I'm worried about is I have made downtown redevelopment, revitalization, all of that a priority for almost 20 years in Roseville, starting with my service on the Planning Commission. And there is really, and I'm not being critical of the council, please don't take this wrong, but there really isn't a champion for downtown council moving forward. And I'm having conversations with council members trying to encourage them to make that a priority. But in that situation, I think it's critical that staff is up to speed, up to date, on board, and part of this moving forward, because as an example in our community, councils change. Staff doesn't change as frequently, and it's critical that you have that consistency and that focus and that priority as we move forward. So I wanted to add that. I appreciate having been involved. I am a little worried about whether or not downtown and revitalization will continue to be a priority of the new council in Roseville. And I'm just being open and honest with you. But I will continue to make myself known about the importance of that. And like I said, I am working on and lobbying several council members to please pick up the gauntlet and move forward with this thing, because it's critical. You know, downtown's old, new, revitalized, they're the heart of the community. And whether everybody goes downtown or not, it's still the heart of the community. And in Roseville, it is the center of our community. That's where our city hall is, and our main post office. You know, it's the heart of the community, and we can't let those die. And when they do die, we have to bring them back. And we worked really hard in Roseville to do that over the years. And I think this toolkit that you are helping to put together will be extremely helpful to future councils and staff. So my comments.
Very good, John. I think that is very well put. And I'll share my own situation. I was just reelected last week, which is great. But if you look at my council in Rancho Cordova, where we don't yet have districts, I am now the only representative of the older part of town. The older part of town in Rancho Cordova's case that has 80% of our population in it. So we now have 4 representatives from 20% and 1 representative, me, from the older 80%. And so you end up with this political dynamic of, you know, majority of your council has no idea what the issues are up there because they never go up there. They're not around there. They're just not, their daily lives do not engage that area. That probably won't be our position forever, because we're going to be forced into districts for worse or for better, depending on your point of view. But this is a real issue in the region, because councils could run hot or cold on these issues, and policy wise that could, you know, throw us into disarray. I think that just really calls out the need for, as you said, staff to be engaged, but also for there to be regional momentum on this topic. prioritize this topic as a region so that everyone is sort of pulling in the same direction to accomplish something. And then these little perturbations in the elected officials hopefully don't matter quite as much. That'd be my hope. But thank you, John. I think those were really, really great comments. And you guys have done a lot of remarkable work in your downtown area in Roseville. A lot to be proud of there. All right, other comments about what it would take to move this forward in your jurisdiction? Are there any strategies that we somehow left off here? Anything that we skipped that we should still consider to add? I heard what Julie said earlier. I could call it placemaking, I guess, but sort of that overall, what's our story? How do we frame this place? How do we make this something someone's willing to commit to alter their normal life pattern, to engage in, or even motivated to invest in or live in? So I don't know that we fully captured that intent in this document, or that necessity in this document, the sort of why and the what the story is, as Julie so put it so well. So that might be a consideration.
And then Chair Sander, we also noted from Director Saragosa's comments on supports for addressing absentee landlords. So we've captured that from earlier.
Yeah, that's a real challenge, and we should probably talk about what those tools could be for dealing with those absentee or recalcitrant landlords.
Related to that statement.
Sorry,
go ahead, Louise, please.
I was just going to say one comment on the previous discussion about sort of how to keep momentum, especially with shifting political will or whatever. I would just say one thing we see a lot of success with around the state, and we really try to encourage, is building partnerships. So it's not just the local jurisdiction that is on the hook for, but if you've got a transit agency in a city or a utility, and that partnership piece can be really valuable when things are when you're in a dynamic environment. It can also be challenging, but it can help to keep a focus and some shared priorities. So that's one thing it might be worth considering, how to reflect in the toolkit. And then I just want to say I really am very excited to see the anti-displacement section. I think that's really, really important and really thoughtfully done.
And Louise, I think you took the words out of my mouth and said them way better than I could. I think the perspective of getting partnerships with agencies like SMUD is going to involve also getting in front of our board and articulating the role that the non-jurisdictional agencies can play in advancing this forward. And I think to the point that was just brought up about the absentee owners, I mean, that's a role I think that an agency like SMUD or other agencies can play a support in that process, given the contact that we have with our customers. So I think, again, leveraging that relationship and identifying roles and responsibilities for the non-jurisdictional agencies and getting in front of the board bodies and the key staff is imperative in maintaining that momentum. I think the time, particularly for the agency that I represent, is good as we're embracing that role.
David, I had two comments to kind of piggyback on what's being said. One is the task force for me has been incredibly educational. And I feel like the collaboration of this team on the task force has been meaningful. Like, we've had dialogue about issues from different perspectives that I think have kind of elevated everybody's understanding. I'm wondering if it makes sense for you to consider continuing the task force for another year, because we've matured as a team in our understanding. I would also say that one thing that's kind of difficult when you do something as productive as this team has done is you come out of it with a lot of categories and generalizations that might be more meaningful to one person or another. And from my perspective, the thing I keep hearing from everyone, regardless of whether it's Placerville or it's downtown Sacramento, it seems that everybody is concerned about the housing insecurity, and that housing is absolutely a tipping point for every other thing that we do, whether it's the retail or any other business thriving. Housing insecurity, whether you have you know, a 20-something that's looking for a place to live, or you have aging parents that need a place to live, or whether you just simply recognizing that we have a huge unsheltered population, not to mention, you know, people that are living paycheck to paycheck. And one of the Rancho Cordova examples was schools and people moving frequently, and the impact that that has on a mother and father and child, and the impact it has on the school system to have a really transient population. So I'm wondering if maybe the task force could continue, but I wonder if we could agree that there are one or two priority topics that realistically, if we help to solve, are a game changer for everyone, regardless of where they reside, regardless of what their issues are. And I'm just saying, for me, it seems to always come down to housing security for people.
That's literally our next agenda item. It kind of blurs, 2 and 3 here, but how do we best take this forward? So I've been asking some questions kind of around the periphery of that, but you put it very well. If we continue, if SACOG continues an effort here, which I anticipate we would, strategically, what is our best choice for that future focus? So you just suggested housing security is an important aspect of that. I think the other area around which we have a little momentum is what James talked to earlier, and I've talked to in the past, which is that regional fee, the SMUDs, the sewers, the drainage districts, all that stuff that sort of piles on outside of the local jurisdiction's control and impacts a project. Is there a way to better coordinate those agencies towards, commercial corridor redevelopment goals? I see those two, but there may be more. So colleagues on the task force, do you see, if we continue this forward a year, what would those focal points be, do you think?
Well, I think this, Michael, I think, one thing, and I think it's come up from various participants today, but in terms of COVID, I mean, I do believe, and this is purely anecdotal, but I do think that there is a greater emphasis on, what's right around the corner from you. What's your ability to just walk out your front door and be able to go get something when you're not moving around a lot. And especially now, I think we're going to probably all be going back into more restrictive tiers and probably a statewide restrictions as well. This is going to be sort of our new normal for a while. And even going forward, as we look at commercial property and office space and what does that look like post-COVID? I do think there's going to be more of an emphasis on what's right around your house and your ability to be able to do things just closer to where you're at. And so whether that's transforming office buildings, whether that's, doing different things in these corridors, I do think there will be an appetite out there to maybe look at things differently than what we've had in the past. So I think just from an opportunity standpoint, I do think that there could be some momentum there to try some new things, and maybe even as we talked about the legislative path, if there are some issues, maybe now is the time to bring those up as we're facing the COVID crisis, to be able to look at opportunities to do things differently.
And so, go ahead.
No, and so I would say I would be another one to say I'd love to see this go forward. I want to thank all of our non board member participants. It's been incredibly helpful to me to hear your experiences as well as for your knowledge. So I just wanted to thank everybody for that. But certainly would be helpful, I think, from my perspective, to see this continue in some fashion going forward as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point about where the future lies. So much of our new housing production is suburban, cookie cutter development, and that can lead to conditions that now might seem odd. Like, are houses mainly places where you store your cars and your stuff and you sleep? Or is that a place where you're expected to live and work and educate your kids? Because that's not necessarily how we designed subdivisions, right? They don't necessarily function well for that. If you can't easily walk to a place or bike to a place, if you're not connected, if you don't have the right spaces in your house, if you don't have the right comfort feeling there versus, the task that you're now trying to accomplish there. So yeah, I think you're exactly right. The future may look very different in terms of development because of this COVID situation that we're in. Okay, other comments about going forward and what we might want to take as priorities going forward? Are there other partners who we should have at this table going forward who we don't currently have? I mean, I, for one, have incredibly valued the private sector input here. Julie and some of your colleagues who've been with us over these months, incredible insights, because all too often you sit on these panels and there's 12 planners and one doer, and the doer gets bored with all the planning, and then you end up planning, but no one does anything about it. That's the downfall of a lot of public process. So I would say, as many doers as possible is what would be a great idea going forward.
Yeah, I agree. Getting some builders on to this group would be really helpful. Like more people who are actually developing and building housing would be really good.
On a separate discussion group we had just last week, SACOG did, I got to tell you, I'm so impressed with SACOG. I came into this, as you all know, a little bit cynical, and I really have, I just adore this team. And last week they had a gentleman who presented on ADU development who's really powerful. He's got a very powerful personal story. And he also is really moving the needle on this kind of development, which could benefit both suburban and urban infill. And if there was any way you could get him to join this panel, he has just a wealth of knowledge. And I think it would be, great. One of the reasons we wanted to put the case studies, I think, into this document was a lot of times people don't understand necessarily because they don't work in the field. Everybody has a layer of it, but nobody gets the full vertical integration of the lifespan of a development project. One of the reasons it was important to me to share case studies of output and value was to encourage development and for jurisdictions to be able to actually kind of recruit development. But also, you can do simple math and go into like the Kind project in West Sacramento and say if exit value equals this, then the number of units provided on a value basis equaled this, which must mean the cost of this was less. And you can do the same thing on the adaptive reuse project, and you can do the same thing on the little for sale nest project that we put in there. And we tried to supply the diversity of product that would enable people to kind of do that simple math and say, now, where do we apply this type of product to the need that we have in our community? Because I hope it makes everyone more powerful in the discussion. And that's all. I just want you to know that I want to be transparent with the team. I agree that there are other developers. We have a unique community and that our development community is willing to be more transparent. And I think if you can bring other people in that can help kind of vertically integrate this process from infrastructure and study to output and the living environment, that you can powerfully move the needle in your region, in our region.
Good. I participated in the development of a tool. It was for policymakers, and it was debuted at the National League of Cities. Oh gosh, that's probably been 5 or 6 years ago now. And I think the Sacramento area planners group was hoping to bring it here, and I'm not sure it ever got implemented. I was in on an early discussion, and then I don't think I heard about it. But the cool thing about it was they sat all these city council members and mayors down in this room and said, okay, you've got these 3 blocks in your downtown area to redevelop. here's your budget, and here are things to consider putting in there. And then on the side, as you made decisions about what went where and what it was going to look like, on the side, they had a very complicated model into which they would input your decisions and then watch the economic impact of those decisions and your ability to finance the various things you're putting in. So not only did it keep track of what you were spending, but the economic impact going forward of what worked there. So you saw some council members, for example, immediately rush and say, hey, right in the centerpiece of this 4-block area, we got to put the homeless shelter. And you could do that. Yep, there you go. You put it in there. But in the model, suddenly you devalued all the properties immediately adjacent to that. Or it was decisions like that. Oh, you put the grocery store in, that takes up a lot of parking. You just lost the housing you want to accomplish. It was really fascinating. And you could see, I'm a small business guy and was raised in that environment. So I hope I kind of get it, on balancing the books and making things profitable. But you could really see a lot of policymakers who had never really thought that fully out, who had never added that up and tried to balance the checkbook on a project to see what the impacts of the various decisions were. They usually just get this is part of the downside of our process. We just get this little bitty view of something, not a global one. So I don't know. I think that kind of a process for some of our elected officials might be pretty valuable. And this, of course, infill, this is the critical piece of that and the very difficult piece of that, trying to make development work.
So David, related to that, the Urban Land Institute actually runs a program called Urban Plan that runs a similar type of model. And
that may have been it, actually. If it was developed 8 years ago, that's right. I think ULI was trying to do it locally.
Right. And so now with COVID, we've actually been able to do it virtually. So I think there's an opportunity to leverage that tool. Because again, to your point of being able to see the economic effects of certain key decisions, and putting that in the hands of decision makers, it's actually one of the goals for ULI. So, I'm the current chair, and Isabel will be the incoming chair. So between the two of us, you'll have a ULI chair involved and engaged, but it'd be an opportunity to bring a lot of elected officials, some on the ground experience. And what they're trying to work on by 2021 is being able to tailor it to some of the more specific characteristics of the city that you're in. So I'd love to talk offline about how we could collaborate there.
Sure, I'd be happy to help. I remember the table adjacent to mine, the elected officials were having a contest about who could get the most affordable housing into their project. And, it was like one-upsmanship of, well, we're going to go 80% affordable. We're going to go we're going 100% affordable. And then the guy on the side says, and you're totally non-financeable at this point. You can't, there has to be. And they were just like, what? Why? How could this be? We're doing the right thing. Yes, but you have to have the big picture. You've got to understand the big picture.
Guys, I've been harping on this, and I apologize, but for the entire year, the affordable model is broken. It may be necessary, but it's broken. And, the fact, I made this statistic earlier that we could deliver a unit for $170,000 versus $550,000. Those are staggering numbers. And that's exactly what makes it non-financeable. Not to mention the fact that you are limiting income. And I think the last thing that you want to do is just put somebody in a predicament of being able to afford their home for a phase of their life while they earn a certain income, and then they're unable to strive for more without being displaced from their home.
Exactly, right.
So I just feel like there's so much we can do with that, the model of figuring out a hybrid product that enables us to deliver more housing security to more people at every level, and basically start there. And I love the discussion about collecting the various agencies of regional sanitation and school district and the county and SMUD or PG&E and the municipality, because you're right, it does get daunting when you're conducting 6 different negotiations to try to get a project across the finish line. And I have to say, to Jose and to Isabel, ULI is one of the most effective organizations around. If you're not a member of anything else, that is one of the best organizations as far as getting like real-time meaningful information out to between the development community and municipalities. It's a very good tether between the two.
Yeah, Jose, just put that in the chat. There's the link to the program. It's really good. We should probably, maybe as a part of this going forward, we should consider that as one of the tools in the toolkit, just an education of the elected officials about the challenges of infill. Actually, maybe it also extends to some agency staff. You know, I don't know, I'm going to pick on Regional Sand. I don't know if the executives at Regional Sand regularly consider, you know, what this challenge is and how things pencil out. It may even apply to them.
Yeah, it's not limited to public officials. It's titled Public Officials Program, but we actually do it with high school students. We do it with community members. So really, if it's a conversation that SACOG would want to have offline, I know that Monica and James and I had talked about it early on as well as an option. So we're happy to bring it forward.
Yeah, my advice way back when was that SACOG would be the obvious agency to try to roll this out for education in the region. So if that's still undone, we should pursue that. Anything else going forward? Any other comments, advice, things we need to focus on? Otherwise, James, Jennifer, Monica, did you get what you needed out of this meeting? Is there anything else you'd like to ask of us or comment to us about?
Sure, I think just a couple more questions as we think about implementation of the toolkit. If there is anything both, we heard a little bit on partners, who's missing, who else we might bring to the table. Very clearly heard our regulatory infrastructure organizations for fees. Of course, ULI is here. Utility providers. Is there something that you all as individuals, both the elected officials or our private and nonprofit partners, could use from us in terms of implementing any of the strategies? Was there something that jumped out at you that was something very near term that you could use some assistance on, whether it's a communication opportunity or some other? We certainly want to go out and share this toolkit both with our staff, colleagues, and our peers in your cities and counties, but are there other organizations that we could be working with?
And I could give you an example. We have a very popular drive-through, I guess you'd say restaurant, it's more like a drink stand, that wants to go into one of our most urban corners next to a light rail station. So it's an auto-dominated use, enormously popular with the public, getting lots of emails and phone calls saying you must approve, you must approve, you must approve. And it's literally an auto-only use right next to light rail. So, you know, my council is going to be pushed up against this question in a corridor. Do we perpetuate auto uses here or do we do something else? And all the public pressure is one direction. There is zero public pressure saying you really ought to hold this site for something dense and urban and that will help restore the corridor instead of further delay its restoration. So that's the policy gap that all of us are going to face individually.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, you know, maybe we would call in the SACOG expert or the developer from out of town or, you know, who doesn't have a local stake that they're obviously arguing to say, wait a second, what are you guys doing? You know, you can't do this here. This is a special spot. You're gonna wreck future generations' use of this very valuable land if you do this. But at some point, you know, the elected official needs that kind of support, both intellectually and politically.
Yep, definitely hearing that. And then also, was there anything more specificity? So we're also thinking about our staff as well and what any supplemental materials might be, for example, a more step-by-step process or list I know internally we've already talked about a webinar for our colleague staff in cities and counties, so specific to Director Allard. You know, we will be reaching out to our Roseville land use planners. Jennifer manages a lot of communication back and forth, and she recently presented this at our quarterly regional managers meeting, which is the county executives and city managers, assistant city managers attend that. So we will continue to support staff as well in implementation. Or if there is more need for case studies or specific examples of strategies being implemented so that we can share those case studies.
Monica, you know what might be really useful for all of us, because this kind of goes on the back of any individual who wants to try to get any development done anywhere, is if you could take any jurisdiction, whether it's Rancho Cordova, Folsom, Roseville, City of Sacramento, West Sacramento, Placerville, and put together, I would do a case study that says, all right, what are my fees to build 25 single family homes, all in, including my jurisdiction, regional sanitation, the school district, the county, not even taking infrastructure into consideration. Then what I would do is I would say, okay, 25 single family homes versus say 140 unit multifamily product. Like I can give you an exact side-by-side comparison of fees. And I think it would be really informative for the region to understand how these two things compare to each other when you look at the 20, 25 line items within that budget that are calculated based on these uses, so that we can understand really where the math works and where the numbers work. And then I can, if you're interested, I can share with you the development agreement side by side that we are looking at in how we're trying to do workarounds and come up with solutions that actually help both the jurisdiction and the developer achieve the goals. But I do think, like, as much as we've kind of highlighted these case studies, it would be really informative for everyone on the call to understand, like, what's the sum of permits and fees that it takes to get something done, so that you can look at this through the lens of how do I attract development as a solution. Because to David's point, if it's always going to be a drive-through coffee shop and it's never going to be, you know, housing next to light rail, then you have a systemic problem that lasts for 50 years. It's not a, it's literally a change in thinking. And I think people understand the most when it's about the pocketbook of what's the budget for this thing to even get it off the ground.
Thanks.
This is Sandy Drown from the Yuba City Downtown Business Association. And I echo what Julie's saying, is like, because I think the ideas are really great. I've got some investors and I'm like, oh, maybe I can position it to them. But I think for myself, because I'm not an investor, might want to partner now though on something, maybe a small project. But I think that's really trying to explain some of this. And I'm just coming from, you know, just a small business owner on Plymouth Street as well, restaurant owner, is that in order to paint the whole picture, I think, you know, when you're talking to people that aren't excited about and have been in this meeting looking at all the work that's been done, is bottom line is you can show some numbers and the profitability on that and the opportunity. I think that helps with all this work that we've done this last year.
Thanks, Sandy.
Yeah, I like that idea. Anybody else? Monica, do you have anything further?
Nothing from me. Definitely items 2 and 3 kind of bled together, which we had assumed when we were writing that outline that they would, really wanting to get the feedback on, you know, what was missing, what really resonated, and then looking ahead into implementation for 2021 and what were the ideas around that and other support that might be needed. And I think we had a nice, healthy discussion.
Jennifer, anything further you'd like to hear about? James, would you like to wrap this up a little bit? If he is there, perhaps he is not there.
He's here. Also, working from home with a full house as well. So
Yep.
I know that those things happen.
All right. Well, look, we started off in January with some slightly audacious goals. I think we still have some slightly audacious goals and certainly an enormous challenge in front of us as a region. I think we've made some great progress there. And maybe with a few modifications, this toolkit that we've worked on is going to go to the SACOG board this month. Is that right, Monica? Are we? I think so. Or next week, Jennifer, we're headed for SACOG board?
In December.
December. I'm a month ahead already. I already purchased a Christmas present. I've never, ever purchased anything this early. So I'm just off apparently on my months. But so we are moving forward with this, and there will be something next. Now, what exactly that next is, I think we will probably be a task force of some kind, similar group perhaps, pursuing some more limited goals on our list. And we discussed those today. I think we've identified some really good targets. So I want to thank you all again for your great work. You've accomplished a lot this year. Don't think you're done yet, because there's a lot more to do. And we will be back, I think, with some exciting options beginning in January of next year. And hopefully all of us working together can cause a significant change in perhaps even the development pattern of our region going forward and how we can utilize these old commercial corridors. So with that, if anyone has anything else they would like to add, I'm open to it. If not, thank you all again. And we are going to adjourn the meeting for now, and I will see you all in the near future. All right.
Thank you all.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.